How's it going, guys? It's Eclipse here, and today we're going to be checking out the top 5 tier 10 heavy tanks that you want to be picking up in World of Tanks console, the ones that you should aim for first, and also have a look at some of the other options that you can choose at tier 10 and kind of give our opinion as to how they will play in game. Now, to begin with, we will start off with number 1, and that is, in my personal opinion, the T57 Heavy. I am slightly biased. This is the first tier 10 heavy tank I picked up on the game just because of that auto-loading mechanic it does get. It's not your traditional tier 10 heavy tank, but it certainly can output the damage of a medium tank. You know, you've got that high DPM. You do have armor that can work, and you have to kind of use it like a non-traditional heavy tank. It's very, very influential in the game and can certainly deal a lot of damage. So what's special about the T57 Heavy? Well, if we have a look at its equipment and its gun, we can look at what sort of things you can use in it. We have the advanced optics to increase that view range up to 440, just so that we don't get outspotted all of the time, and it's useful against coming up against enemy heavies whenever that may happen. You know, get that slight advantage in view range, and since you can't use a gun loader because it is an auto loader, it means that, you know, you've got to use your equipment elsewhere. Now, probably the most important equipment that you can put in the T57 Heavy is the gun stabilizer. This is really, really vital and definitely something you should be looking at when you buy your tank. Yeah, 100% put this in the tank. It just gives you a flat 20% increase to accuracy, and that is really, really key. And then finally, we went with improved ventilation, which is just going to improve your 57 Heavy's performance by around 5%. So that will increase your damage output. It will also increase your accuracy in some regards, and it should definitely improve the tank overall when you're playing. And definitely if you're trying to go towards some marks of excellence, these are the kind of optimal perks you want to be picking up. Now, in terms of its armour, it really doesn't get the best armour out of any of the heavy tanks. You're looking on its turret of around 150mm, but that is slightly angled in places, but often you will just get penned straight through the turret, so it's a case of trying to evade shots, you know, baiting and twisting your turret in weird ways to increase that chance of bouncing. But when you do get to unload your full clip of damage with this amazing gun that it does get, it's a 4-clip autoloader, so it can deal 1600 total damage if you manage to put them all out. It reloads in about 20 seconds with all of the full equipment on it, and it can really, really, really punish your opponents that you come up against. It's absolutely fantastic. DPM can go up to, you know, looking probably in the range of 4000 DPM on a heavy with all of the perks and everything like that. Certainly one of my favourites, if not my favourite tier 10 heavy tank. Also got that speed of 35 kilometers an hour forward, so it's not completely slow, and it certainly is one of my faves. And the second heavy tank on our list is the IS7, so we're going to be focusing mainly on non-premium tier 10 tanks, so that won't include the machine and also some of the other ones that just aren't really available for the majority of players. These are just ones that you can actually pick up. So the IS7, what is this? Where does it come from? Obviously the Russian tech tree. There's a variety of different tanks leading up to it. If we have a look, you can pick up multiple tanks from the Object 257, which is what leads on to the IS7. The IS7 is one of those tanks that you can really rely on its turret armor. It's absolutely fantastic. So if we look at the armor viewer, you can see that the turret is nigh on impenetrable. There's some really, really, really good angles on the turret. The only places you're really going to be getting penned is this kind of cheek area, and with heat from something like a Jaeger. A lot of really high alpha TDs like the 268 will have the heat round penetration to go through your turret, so it's kind of, you've got to be a bit wary of the caliber of guns that you're coming up against with the penetration values that they carry with that. So Jaeger heat rounds, Object 268 heat rounds, all of those like 155mm with severely high penetration, you've got to be slightly worried about. But for the majority of situations, people aren't going to be able to pen you. I mean, if they're above you, they can shoot down into the cupolas of this tank, but trying to hit that is actually so difficult, and it's not going to be done very reliably at all. I mean, the hull armour of this tank is also really good. You can bounce a few shots if you use it, and you use it by wiggling to and fro. You kind of want to keep your armour frontal towards the enemy at all times. You don't really want to angle one side because it makes the effective armour of the plate weaker. We do have a video if you want to check out angling that I will link on this video, so you can check that out, or just go to my channel and have a look at World of Tanks console guides and it will be there. But mainly your key thing in this is just to use that gun. The 490 alpha damage of the gun is really nice. You get an okay DPM, I guess, for a heavy tank. You've got the mobility of a medium tank. You can go 59.6 kilometers an hour forward, which is really fast for a heavy. It's one of the most, well, not agile, but certainly one of the most mobile heavy tanks in the game right now. With this 130mm gun with 0.4 accuracy, will mean that with all of the bonuses and commander perks that you put on this thing, you can certainly have a really good time. DPM is kind of not the best, but if you buff it up, you can probably get around 2,500, and it certainly can be dangerous if you can manage to get hold down where you only show your turret to the opponents. Now, the kind of equipment that I'd run in this tank, unfortunately I don't have any on right now, but that is gun stabilizer, reduce the accuracy that is pretty poor, and then you want to be putting on loading time, and then it's kind of between vents, or if you want to try and get some more spotting on this tank just so that you don't get outspotted by some medium tanks and stuff like that, or just increase the chances of you not getting caught out in the open by a tank that you can't spot, then maybe advanced optics is your best bet. But for me personally, I'd run ventilation, advanced loader and gun stabilizer on this thing. Now, I don't think it would be a top 5 tier 10 heavy tank guide without having the Super Conqueror in here somewhere. This thing is absolutely disgusting in game. It can be so fun to play. The turret armor of this thing is absolutely ridiculous, which means you can go hold down in this thing very reliably. That you do have a slight weak point on the top of the tank, but it's so hard to hit, and it's very unreliable to be able to pen just because of the angling of it. That bar at the top isn't an actual armor, so it's just spaced armor basically, and the only part that you can actually pen is this kind of like bulbous bit that you can kind of see up there. Very difficult to hit, and especially if they're moving and using gun depression, you pretty much have no chance of being able to shoot it. Yeah, this thing is absolutely ridiculous. The turret armor with the spaced armor on the sides means it's virtually impenetrable, and you're not going to be able to get it in most situations. Now, when it comes to the hull armor, you do have a pretty weak lower plate on this thing, which means that this big target area right at the bottom can actually be penned really easily. You kind of want to angle in this tank just to increase the chance of you actually bouncing, but you do have to note that you can be penned in the side where there's this like angled bit on the side of your tank just below the turret. So it's that kind of bit that you see is red. This area here can actually be penned from all angles, and it tends to get weaker as you go on. So you can see as you side scrape, people will actually aim there to be able to pen you, which is something that you can use to take out this tanking game. Now, what's special about the Super Conqueror? Well, basically it has a medium gun. This thing doesn't miss on the move. It can fire on the move all of the time. 0.33 accuracy base, which is unheard of on a heavy tank anyway, with 400 alpha damage. Its reload is fantastic. You've got 6.9 rate of fire base, so you can get that up probably to about 8 rounds a minute to 8.5 rounds a minute. You'll probably be reloading in about 8 seconds, pumping out 400 alpha damage, looking at a really decent DPM of about 3,000, I'd say, on this thing. Yeah, absolutely fantastic. Armor works an absolute treat, and your turret is just impenetrable nigh on from the front, unless you're coming up against really high alpha TDs and they manage to squeeze one in between your spaced armor and the mantlet. Then yeah, I mean, nigh on impenetrable. Really good tank, and I certainly would recommend it. It's not the fastest heavy tank, but it can certainly get around the battlefield as and when you need it. It's kind of like a very slow medium, but with actual armor that works very effectively. Coming in at number 4, we have the WZ 111-5A. This is very rare for a top 5 video having a Chinese tank on it, but this tank is actually so good in game. It really is. It's such a nice tank in game, and obviously you know about the WZ Quillin. That is a better version of this basically, because it gets that 590 alpha instead of the 490. This thing can be really strong in game, and certainly you can have some fun with it. Now, the armor layout of the tank is primarily focused towards the turret. You've got a lot of your armor there, as with most heavy tanks. You know, the hull armor tends to be penetrable using pretty much any tank in the game, as long as at tier 10 and tier 8, as long as you're firing premium, you'll be able to go through most hull armors from the front on any tank that you're coming up against, unless you are in like a stock tier 8. So, you know, be careful with showing your hull armor in any of these tier 10 heavy tanks, but certainly the turret armor is where you need to be focusing on getting yourself hold down in any game mode that you do play in this game. You know, it does have cupolas which you can actually pen. The left cupola is actually weaker than the right cupola on this thing if you're facing it from the front, so make sure if you're an opponent you want to be hitting this left cupola. It is more angled than the right hand cupola, but you, just because of the sheer amount of armor that it loses, you're probably more likely to actually pen the left hand cupola. Now, yet again, like the IS7, if you angle in this thing, it makes the armor on the front less effective, but you know, it's kind of one of those where you have to kind of wiggle to side to try and actually get a little bounce on there, and face hugging in this thing is not necessarily a very good idea, although if you can limit the amount of the upper plate that they can actually hit, then it's really good, and certainly if you're forcing them to shoot at your turret, it can be very good. You know, with regards to its gun is actually not that bad. You've got around about 2.6 thousand DPM on this thing, which you can buff up probably to around 3,000 to 3,200. Your accuracy could do with a little bit of a buff using any of the equipment that you can have on this tank, like stabilizers, to be able to increase that accuracy and make you able to fire on the move if you need to, whilst aimed, and making sure that you just have the best accuracy possible in heavy tanks is always the key. You know, you've got a decent amount of hit points in this thing, and certainly the speed to be able to develop your game across the time that you're in the game. You know, 50 kilometers an hour allows you to be very mobile, and almost like a medium tank. You just won't have the acceleration of a medium tank in this thing, and certainly won't have the concealment of one. Now, in terms of spotting, do you want to put advanced optics in this thing? I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but it's definitely one that you could go for if you really want to get that extra bit of spotting, and primarily I'd focus on vents, loading time, and obviously your gun stabilizer if it's possible to put it on this tank. I haven't personally got this one, but it's certainly a tank I know when I come up against it, it is a bit of a clubber at tier 10. Then coming in at number 5, we have the 60 TP. This is the Polish tier 10 heavy tank. It's really strong in game, and certainly can be absolutely disgusting if you put it in the right situations. This massive gun that it does get, it's almost like a better E100, to be honest with you. Its armor actually works for the most part. The E100 just has been left a little bit behind with regards to its armor model. You know, it really doesn't have the armor like it used to. This thing is certainly more armored than the E100, even though it probably has less on its actual armor values. It's just a lot better angle, and its turret works a lot better, except from this big cupola on the top that you can hit, but even that is fairly strong with 220mm, that obviously when you're moving about is going to be very hard to hit. Now, with regards to what's special about this is you do get a fairly decent mobility, 35 kilometers an hour, so you're not absolutely sluggish like a mouse. You get a really big gun with this thing. 750 alpha with your standard rounds and 950 with your HE rounds. HE can be really useful in a tank like this as well. If you come up against hold down opposition that you can't really reliably pen, then it can actually be really useful to fire HE, where you don't have to aim, you're only poking for like half a second, putting that round in and pulling back into cover where you don't have to take any more hits. It certainly can work against lightly armoured mediums and light tanks that you can just fire HE at and deal 950 alpha. Yeah, this thing could be certainly a little bit of a beast at tier 10, and certainly one to keep an eye out for. In terms of its lower plate, it's so small, means that being able to actually hit it is quite hard. It's not an easy job to be able to aim at the lower plate, although most players that can actually aim very well will be able to hit it, but it is certainly a lot harder than something like the British tier 10 heavy tanks. Now, the DPM on this thing is fairly slow. You have got 2.78 rounds per minute, which means your DPM is just looking just over 2,000, which is not particularly amazing, but remember, you can increase that dramatically if you put on that loading, which I would recommend. You know, that 10% decrease in reload time is going to be fantastic on a tank like this. Then I'd be looking at potentially putting on improved ventilation and stabilizers. Yet again is key for that. You know, the accuracy at 0.39 meters at 100 meters is quite high, but it's not the highest, and it certainly isn't too bad to the point where you're going to be missing a lot of your shots. Just make sure that you fully aim in this thing and you'll be having a whale of a time. And make sure that sometimes you load them HE rounds where they're necessary. That you could have the argument to be able to put the equipment that allows you to swap between the HE and the standard rounds and the heat rounds that this thing gets, but it really is up to you as to what you choose. But other than that, I think that is literally the top 5 heavy tanks in the game at the moment in terms of the tech tree ones. There are a few exceptions, like you do have the machine at tier 10, the auto-loading kind of Skoda Chieftain 50B hybrid thing that they decided was actually balanced. You know, not my cup of tea in terms of the way it plays and just how overpowered it really actually is, but it is certainly disgusting in game, and certainly one that if you manage to pick up the contract when it does eventually come out will be really, really good to pick up, but it's up to you. I hope you guys did enjoy this video. If you like some top 5 tanks videos, then you can check them out on the channel. I'll link a playlist at the end of this one that you can have a look at some of the other ones, go through them, give your opinions, and give me some suggestions for more videos regarding top 5 tanks that you want to see on this channel. Hopefully you did enjoy. If you did, hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I hope to see you in the next video. Goodbye.